Welcome back to Silk Warrant. Today in this story is about a girl sold to settle a debt and how she took everything back.
The envelope was already open when they handed it to me. My mother slid it across the kitchen table like it was a grocery receipt. One cold sentence, "You'll marry Daniel Hurst's son, and that's how we settle this." The smell of her coffee, hazelnut, always hazelnut mixed with the ink on the paper inside. A debt agreement. $60,000. My father's signature at the bottom, shaking slightly, like even his hand knew what it had done. I remember thinking, they have no idea I can read a contract. And somewhere in that kitchen, tucked behind the fruit bowl on the counter, was a small brass key on a blue ribbon. I didn't know yet what it opened, but I would. I want to tell you I fought back that day. I want to tell you I threw the envelope or cried or ran. I didn't do any of those things. I was 19. I had one semester of community college behind me, a part-time job at a copy center downtown, and a family that had spent the last decade teaching me that my silence was the same as my consent. So I sat in that chair, I read the document twice, and I asked only one question. How much? My mother looked at my father looked at the table. 60,000, he said, to the Hursts. From before you were born, technically, but they called it in. Called it in, like a favor, like I was a coupon. The man I would marry was named Marcus Hurst. I had met him exactly once, at a 4th of July barbecue when I was 16. He was 24 then. He'd spent the entire afternoon talking loudly about a car he was going to buy. He smelled like lighter fluid and certainty. The wedding was 11 months later. Here is what no one tells you about marrying into a debt arrangement. The creditor family never lets you forget the math. Patricia Hurst, Marcus's mother, had a habit. Every time I entered a room, every single time, she'd look at me for exactly 2 seconds before she looked away. Not at my face, at the space just above my left shoulder. Like she was checking a price tag that had been stapled there. I noticed it the first Sunday dinner. I noticed it at Christmas. I noticed it at my own wedding reception, when she stood next to me for the photographer and her eyes went, check, to that spot above my shoulder before she smiled. I filed it. I didn't react. I just filed it. Marcus was not a cruel man in obvious ways. That's what made it harder to name. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. What he did was quieter than that. He made decisions and presented them as facts. He moved us to a house 20 minutes from his parents without asking. He told me I'd be more comfortable not working once we were married. He explained my own opinions back to me in simpler terms, nodding slowly, like I was a child who'd almost gotten the answer right. I smiled. I thanked him. I went back to reading. Because here is the thing about a copy center job that Marcus never thought to ask about. You learn to read fast. Contracts, legal briefs, business filings. Hundreds of them pass through your hands. And even after I stopped working there, I kept reading. While Marcus watched sports, I read real estate law. While he golfed on Saturdays, I took an online paralegal certification. While he talked at dinner parties about investments he didn't fully understand, I sat at the far end of the table and learned the difference between a lien and a levy. He thought my silence was agreement. It wasn't. It was a tally. The brass key showed up again in my life when I was 23. My parents were moving, downsizing, supposedly, though the real reason was that my father's second round of bad decisions had caught up with the first round, and my mother called me to help pack. I found it in a kitchen drawer, still on the blue ribbon, and I picked it up and held it. "What's this open?" I asked. My mother was wrapping plates in newspaper. She didn't look up. "Storage unit," she said. "Your grandmother's things. We've been paying rent on it for years. You can have it. We can't afford the unit anymore anyway." She said it like it was nothing. Like she was handing me an old magazine. I took the key. I drove to the storage facility on Route 9. I unlocked Unit 114. What was inside that storage unit should not have existed. My grandmother, my father's mother, Eleanor, had died when I was 12. I remembered her as a quiet woman who kept a garden and made very good pie. What I did not know, until I stood in that unit under a single bare bulb, was that a leaner had spent 40 years quietly accumulating. Not money, not jewelry, documents, boxes of them. Property records, insurance policies. A will, not the one probated after her death, a different one, dated 8 months later, in her own handwriting, witnessed and notarized. Letters between my father and his brother, about a leaner's estate, that made my chest go still and cold. My father had told his family that a leaner's estate was nearly nothing, that she'd spent it down. She hadn't. There was a property in her name, a small commercial lot 40 minutes east that had never been transferred, never probated. Sitting in legal limbo, because the will that should have directed it had somehow never surfaced. I locked that unit. I drove home. I did not tell Marcus. I did not call my parents. I sat in my car in the driveway for 22 minutes. Then I walked inside, made dinner, and waited. By 26, I had a paralegal job I'd gotten without telling Marcus I'd applied. He found out when a paycheck arrived in the mail. He held it up at the kitchen table. Same table, different house. Same posture as my father had years before, and he looked at me with that patient, explaining expression. "We don't need this," he said. "I know," I said. "It's embarrassing, honestly. My mother's already—" "Marcus." I looked at him steadily. "I'm keeping the job." He laughed a little. Then he saw my face. He kept the laugh, but his eyes shifted, just slightly, just briefly, to that space above my left shoulder. I recognized the look. He'd learned it from his mother. The price tag check. I smiled and asked what he wanted for dinner. But something had moved in the room. We both felt it. He didn't bring up the job again. I spent 2 years quietly, carefully untangling a leaner's estate. I hired an attorney, a woman named Claudia, who wore terrible blazers and was the sharpest person I'd ever met, and we worked through the documentation in the storage unit piece by piece. The notarized will was valid. The property was real. The lot had appreciated enormously over 30 years because a commercial corridor had grown up around it. When it was fully resolved, a leaner's estate, the one my father had buried, was worth $230,000. I was the sole named beneficiary. The morning Claudia called me with the final number, I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store. I pressed my phone to my ear and stared at a shopping cart someone had left in the middle of the parking lot. It rolled slowly on its own until it bumped gently against a concrete barrier and stopped. I thought about the envelope, the debt agreement, $60,000, my father's shaking signature. I thought about Patricia Hurst's eyes going to that spot above my left shoulder. I said, "Thank you, Claudia," and I ended the call. I need to tell you about the Thursday morning when everything I had been building for 11 years became a structure strong enough to walk away from. Marcus had been having an affair. I had known about it for approximately 8 months. I want to be precise about that, 8 months. I want you to understand that I didn't act the moment I found out, because acting in the moment is for people who haven't thought it through. I had thought it through. The divorce filing was ready. The asset documentation was ready. Claudia had already walked me through the split. Marcus, it turned out, had made a series of financial decisions over our marriage that had quietly transferred much of his family's money into jointly held accounts, which now meant it was half mine. He didn't know that I knew this. He had never thought to check what I understood about marital property law. The night before I filed, we had dinner at Patricia's house, her usual Sunday roast. I sat at the table, and at one point she turned to look at me, and her eyes went check to that space above my shoulder. The price tag, still there after 11 years in her mind. Still appraising, I looked directly at her. For the first time, I held her gaze long enough that she was the one who looked away. She picked up her wine glass. Her hand was slightly unsteady. She knew. She didn't know what she knew, but she knew. I filed on a Monday. Marcus was served at his office, which I had chosen deliberately because he cared enormously about how things looked at his office. He called me 4 times. I let all 4 go to voicemail. The 5th time I picked up. "This is insane," he said. You have nothing, Rachel. You have nothing without this family." I let a beat pass, a full, complete beat. You were right that I came into this family with nothing, I said. You were wrong about everything else. He started to speak. I ended the call. There is a part of this story I haven't told yet. The part about my parents. When the divorce became public, and in a town that size, everything becomes public, my mother called me. She was upset in the specific way she got upset when things reflected poorly on the family's reputation, which was the only kind of upset she reliably felt. The Hursts will never forgive this, she told me, and that debt, your father's debt, you know they could. Mom, Rachel, that money, the 60,000. Yes, I paid it, I said. 3 weeks ago, in full, a certified check directly to the Hearst Family Trust with a signed receipt. Claudia handled it. Silence. What? My mother said. The debt is gone, it's been discharged. There's a paper trail. They cannot use it. You cannot use it. It does not exist anymore as a thing that has anything to do with me. More silence. Why would you? She started. Because, I said, I wanted it to be my choice that it was over. Not yours, not theirs, mine. I heard her set something down on the counter. A mug, maybe, ceramic on tile. I used grandmother's money, I added. I thought she'd have liked that. I said goodbye. I hung up. I am 30 years old. I have a 2-bedroom apartment with good light and a reading chair I bought myself. I have work I am good at, a salary I negotiated without apologizing for the number. And a friend named Dara who brings wine on Fridays and never once asks me to be smaller, so the room feels more comfortable. The brass key is on my bookshelf, blue ribbon and all. It doesn't open anything anymore. The storage unit was cleared, the estate resolved, the unit closed. I kept the key anyway, not as a symbol. I'm not sentimental about objects. I kept it because it reminds me that the most important things in your life have a way of waiting quietly in drawers, ignored, overlooked, underestimated, until someone who knows how to read finally comes along and picks them up. My grandmother knew I would find it eventually. I believe that in the uncomplicated part of my chest. She knew something about me that the people who handed me off like a line item never bothered to learn. She knew I could read a contract. I don't need you to be angry on my behalf. I made my own choices from the moment I had options, and the moment I had options was earlier than anyone expected. But here is what I want to leave you with. Not a question about betrayal. Not a question about family. This, somewhere in your life right now, there is a drawer, and in that drawer there is a key. And you have been walking past that drawer for years because someone, at some point, taught you that the things inside it were not yours to claim. They were wrong about that. The only real question is, how long are you going to leave it locked?